The Fourth Stall, chapter 18. I had a hard time thinking about anything but Vince later that day when I met up with Joe, Nubby, Kitten, and Great White outside the shed. It was 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting with Justin. I tried to put Vince out of my mind. Our plan was dangerous and needed my full attention. The playground and football field had been deserted since 3:25. Nobody would see what was about to go down. Kids usually cleared out pretty quickly after school, and who could blame them? I certainly wasn't going to complain. My plan didn't exactly call for an audience. I unlocked the shed with the key I'd snagged from the janitor earlier that day and ushered the bullies inside. Blimey, it's bloody hot in here, Great White whined as they squeezed inside. I know, it'll just be 20 minutes, okay, I said. Oh, bollocks to this, he said irritably. Kitten and Nubby also looked uncomfortable, but they didn't say anything. In fact, I saw Kitten eyeing the tools on the wall like a little kid might the shelves of Toys R Us. I just shrugged and said, remember, the signal is Blue Jay. Just get on with it already, Great White said. Okay, see you soon, I said with a grin and shut the door. I walked back to the top of the hill overlooking the football field and waited. After about 15 minutes, I saw Justin walking towards the shed from the far end of the field. There was somebody with him, but I couldn't tell who it was. It looked like I was it looked like I was outnumbered, but Justin didn't know that I had a crew hidden inside the shed waiting for my signal. That's why I was surprised to feel so nervous. I was nervous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this kind of anxiety. It must have been the way back when I was 7 or 8 and about to ride my first roller coaster. Suddenly, I really wished that Vince was with me right then, despite everything that had happened that morning. But there really wasn't really much I could do about that anymore. So I took a deep breath and trotted down the slope. I slowed at the bottom and walked across the football field to meet up with one of the school's meanest kids. We converged on the shed at the same time. I nodded. He nodded back. We were about 10 feet away from each other, right near the shed's entrance. Justin wore really baggy jean shorts with the waist sagging down to his thighs so the boxers showed. I always think it's lame when kids wear their pants so low. It makes them look really dorky, like they just took a dump and forgot to take off their pants first. I also noticed that Justin had shaved his head recently. I wondered if it was some sort of homage to Staples. The kids with Justin was his best friend Mitch. The two are always together, and they are usually up to no good, like cheating, skipping school, smoking, or beating up younger kids, either for money or just because they feel like it. They're basically a walking duo of terror. Mitch also wore baggy jean shorts and a black t-shirt. His head wasn't shaved, though. Instead, he was sporting usual greasy brown hair and a white, straight-brimmed New York Yankees baseball hat worn slightly off to the side. He had his hands behind his back. I didn't like that. But in just a few moments, it wouldn't matter. Thanks for coming, I said. Whatever, man. Just say what you got to say, Justin said. At that moment, I saw Mitch take 3 quick steps towards the shed. His hands came out from around his back to reveal a bike lock, the kind that is a big U shape with a little bar that locks in the end. I knew immediately what he was going to do. Blue Jay, I shouted as loud as I could, but it was too late. Mitch slid the bike lock into the shed door handles and then snapped the lock bar. The doors clinked as the bullies and Joe tried to jump out, but the lock was in place and the door clattered harmlessly against themselves. The bullies yelled from inside. Mitch and Justin laughed at their pleas. Trying to pull a fast one on me, Justin scoffed. My stomach sank. I had been double crossed. They knew. They had known everything about our plan. The worst part was that the shed was like a sauna inside, and now the bullies and Joe would be trapped in there for who knew how long. The natural thing to do at this point would probably have been to run, but I couldn't leave my hired muscle to cook like that. It wouldn't be right. Besides, there were only two of them. Maybe I could still get out of this. But that's when the chunky ham and fish head gravy really hit the fan, as Vince's grandma said. A car squealed to a stop behind me. I turned around and saw a black Honda with a spoiler so huge the car probably could have taken flight if it was going fast enough. The four high school kids from last Tuesday clambered out of the car and walked towards me, with PJ in the lead. Well, 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 if it isn't Mr. Problem Solver Guy, PJ said. How nice to see you again. I just looked at him right in the eyes and said nothing, trying to stay calm. Ooh, looks like we got a tough guy on our hands, boy, PJ said with a sickening grin. The four high school kids, Justin and Mitch, grouped around me in a circle. Their shadows blocked out what little sunlight there was that day. You won't be so tough after we're finished with you, PJ said. I knew that my only chance of survival was to strike first, to surprise them. I wasn't much of a fighter. In fact, I'd never gotten into a real fight before. but I figured I was smarter than all of these guys combined, and that gave me at least one advantage. I spun around as they enveloped me. I quickly determined PJ to be the closest, and one of the high school kids with greasy black hair to be the biggest. Hey, let's talk about this, guys. I've got money. I'll pay you. I can double what you're making now. PJ scoffed. I doubt it, Justin said. Right here in my pocket, I have a roll of money, and I even have even more in my office. I reached into my pocket of my jeans. I leaned forward. They leaned forward eagerly. That was in my pocket was a note I had sent to Justin. I grabbed it and pulled it out, but as my hand cleared my pocket, I let the paper flutter to the grass. I made a motion like I went to pick it back up. PJ predictably bent over to get it first, and that's when I struck at him with my foot. I didn't really have a clear plan because, like I said, I'm not a fighter, but in this case, it was them or me. I quickly kicked back the same foot, so my heel slammed into the shin of the greasy high school guy behind me. I heard him hit the ground with a grunt. Then I turned and kicked another kid in the knee. He hit the ground like a dead weight. The high school kid on my right reached out for me. I spun to face him and took a step back to avoid his reach. Two big hands grabbed my arms from behind. I had stepped right into them. I swung my body from side to side, trying to free myself, but the hands were too strong and the fingers just dug into my arms even harder. By now, another kid was coming at me from the front. He had a huge smile on his face as he cracked his knuckles. I was a sitting duck and he knew it. Let's see what you got, loser, I said. Okay, he said and reared back his fist. That's when I leaned into the kid holding me and kicked my leg up as hard as I could. My foot connected with the one spot sure to cause the most damage. I never wished that sort of pain upon anyone, but this was life or death. Oh, he moaned as he crossed his legs and dropped to the ground. The kid holding my arm actually snickered. I guess it's normally pretty funny when people get hit in the groin. Now it was his turn, though. I stamped my heel into his shin as hard as I could. He yelled and his grip loosened. I pulled away from him and then turned and gave him my best shot. He dropped to the ground and started crying. I almost felt bad. PJ was still down, holding his face. Two other kids were in the fetal position, holding their business, and another one was trying to get to his feet again. I looked at Justin, the only one still standing. He looked scared. I walked toward him, but then I stopped when I heard a loud bang on the shed. PJ had gotten up and was standing next to the door. He held a small black tube in his hand like a can of hairspray. He stuck it against the crevice of the shed door. Stop fighting mackerel, douse your little friends, he said. There could have been anything inside that black tube. It could have been water. I looked around as the other kids were climbing back to their feet. It wasn't a risk I was willing to take with my employees trapped inside. Okay, I said, holding my hands up. All my confidence just drained out of me like ice cream from a little hole in the bottom of a waffle cone on a hot day. The other high school kids were on their feet now. Two of them grabbed me, one on each side. They squeezed hard, and I felt pain shoot through my arms. I was surrounded by kids, and I'd never felt so alone in my life. You're in trouble now, you little punk, one of them said. I wanted to say duh, but I thought it best to stay quiet right then. Mitch, PJ, and Justin closed in on me. PJ used his Hollister shirt to wipe his face. His nose was red. I hoped I had broken it. You're going to pay for this, he said, looking down at his shirt. I nodded while raising my eyebrows and said, Yep. Are you smarting off to me? PJ yelled. I nodded. That's when a sharp pain erupted in my stomach. I hadn't even seen it coming. I always thought that people overreacted in movies when they got hit in the gut. I mean, how bad could it hurt, right? Well, I can say that it hurts way worse than it looks. The air shot out of me and a sharp pain stabbed my stomach, followed by a deep rumble that ran straight to my brain. I gasped for air, trying not to cry. It hurt worse than I had ever imagined it could. I tried to bend over, but the two high school kids held me. I wheezed for air, sure I was going to suffocate. PJ laughed. Not such a cocky punk now. The other kids laughed. One holding my arm whispered into my ear, It's payback time. I continued to struggle to breathe. Just when I thought it was all over, that I was going to pass out, I finally was able to get some air in, but that's when the side of my face exploded. Okay, it probably didn't explode, but that's what it felt like. Basically felt like Barry Bonds took batting practice on my head with a titanium baseball bat. My vision blurred and my eyes watered, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I think I'll spare you the rest. It wasn't too pretty. They worked me over for it seemed like a couple of hours. It couldn't have been that long. When they stopped, it was still pretty light out. I was proud that I never cried, but toward the middle, I just started to go numb. I think maybe they broke my tear ducts or something because it hurt so bad. I definitely should have been crying. I kept wondering the whole time why no cars were stopping to help me. Maybe they just didn't notice the little kid getting the snot beat out of him by some gang of high schoolers. Maybe they were too afraid to stop or just didn't care. Or maybe they were all on their Staples payroll too. In the event, Staples hitmen eventually dropped me onto the ground. I looked up to see PJ looming over me with a big smile. That's for Barnaby. And there's a lot more where that came from. Slow and painful, just like Staples said. Right, Mac? They all walked away laughing. After a while, I climbed to my feet. My stomach ached, and my side hurt, and my face felt like a lumpy piece of dried fried cheese. I spit some blood onto the grass and gently touched my cheek. It winced. My whole face throbbed. I was relieved to find that I at least had all my teeth. The shed burst open about that time. Mitch must have taken the leg lock off when they left. Kitten emerged, soaked in sweat. He stumbled forward a few feet and then sat down. He breathed hard. His sweater and collared shirt were soggy, and his normal, neat hair stuck up all over. Nubby, Great White, and Joe followed. Their clothes were drenched, and they panted as if they'd run a marathon. We had just gotten wasted. Mitch and Justin had known everything. It had been a classic double ambush. Mac, I can hardly breathe, Joe said. I nodded and pointed to a spigot behind the shed. The four of them took turns drinking from it. After a few more minutes of walking around and breathing hard and taking off their drenched shirts and wringing out their sweat, they looked a little better. Wow, Mac, what did they do to you? Joe asked after examining my face. I'm okay. They're just sending me a little message. Don't worry about it, I said. He shook his head and whistled. They're not getting away with this, Kitten said softly. My eyes were beady and dark. His eyes were beady and dark. His mouth was drawn into a tight frown. I'd seen that look before. Kitten was angry. The insane little kid looked like he wanted to grab a shovel from the shed and beat someone's face in with it. And he would have, too, had the enemy still been there. Hey, those wankers will pay. I'll kick their arses, Great White added. We will, guys. We'll get back at them, I said. For now, though, you should all just go home. If you want to stay on board and help me get back at these jerks, meet me in my office tomorrow at morning recess. They nodded. With that, we all parted ways to go home. The walk felt much longer than 9 or 10 blocks. I couldn't think about anything but who had double-crossed us. One person kept creeping into my mind as the obvious suspect, but I kept erasing it immediately because there was no way. Skimming some cash was one thing, but double-crossing your best friend to that kind of beating? No, there was no way he'd do that. Whoever the snitch was, though, we needed to figure it out, and fast.